The foreclosure notice was still warm from the printer. Martha Williams stood frozen in Richard Hartwell Jr.'s office, her cleaning rag trembling in her 58-year-old hands. After 30 years of scrubbing this law firm's floors, she'd found plenty of forgotten documents, but never one with her own grandson's address on it. 7-year-old Timothy's home, the house where she'd rocked him to sleep as a baby, the house her daughter Kenya had worked 2 jobs to afford, being foreclosed by the very law firm where Martha had been invisible for 3 decades. The sticky note attached made her blood boil. Another one bites the dust. These people never learn. Don't borrow what you can't pay back. These people. Martha's knees creaked as she bent to check the signature. Richard Hartwell Jr. The same boy she'd watched grow up in these offices. The same boy whose diapers she'd changed in the executive bathroom when his father brought him to work. The same boy who now made $500,000 a year stealing from families like hers. That's when Martha Williams decided to stop being furniture, because what Richard didn't know was that furniture had been listening. For 30 years, Martha had heard every phone call, seen every document, memorized every dirty deal. She knew which judge took bribes in the men's room. She knew which files got shredded without the clients knowing. She knew where the real settlement money went. When you clean up people's messes for 3 decades, you learn their secrets, and Martha Williams had enough secrets to destroy an empire. She folded the foreclosure notice and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then she did something she'd never done in 30 years of service. She sat down in Richard Hartwell Jr.'s leather chair, the same chair she'd polished every morning, the same chair where he'd made jokes about the help not understanding English, the same chair where he'd stolen millions from her community. Martha pulled out her phone, the one her grandson had taught her to use, and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Channel 7 News. This is Martha Williams. I've been cleaning offices at Hartwell Associates for 30 years. And honey, I've got a story that's going to burn this whole city down. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the law degree. Sometimes it's the one with the mop bucket and a perfect memory. Martha Williams didn't go home that night. Instead, she sat in her 1998 Honda Civic in the parking lot, the same car she'd driven to this job for 15 years. The same car Richard Hartwell Jr. had once called an eyesore when he'd asked security to move it to the back lot, where clients couldn't see it. Her arthritis was acting up, it always did when rain was coming, but Martha's hands were steady as she pulled out the small notebook she'd kept in her purse for 3 decades, the one her late husband Earl had given her. "Baby," Earl had said back in 1994, "you're going to see things at that fancy law firm. Write it down. You never know when the Lord might need you to bear witness." Earl had been gone 12 years now, but his wisdom lived on in every page. Martha flipped through entries, her handwriting getting shakier over the years, but her memory crystal clear. May 15th, 1998. Heard Mr. Peterson tell Judge Morrison that the Jackson family settlement was actually $300,000, not the $30,000 they were told. December 3rd, 2005. Found shredded documents in Mr. Richard Jr.'s trash, taped them back together, proof he's been skimming from the elderly client's trust funds. August 22nd, 2015. Overheard Richard Jr. laughing about Mrs. Chen from the church. Said, "These people are too stupid to read contracts. Mrs. Chen can't afford her heart medication because of what they stole." 30 years of evidence, written in her own hand. Dated, detailed, and undeniable. Martha's phone buzzed. A text from her daughter, Kenya. "Mama, where are you? Your dinner's getting cold." For the first time in her life, Martha Williams didn't care about being on time for dinner. She had work to do. The next morning, Martha did something she'd never done in 30 years. She called in sick. "Martha?" Richard's secretary sounded shocked. "But you haven't missed a day since your husband's funeral." "Well, honey, there's a first time for everything." Martha hung up and looked around her kitchen table. Spread before her were 3 decades of Christmas cards from the firm, back when they still remembered she existed. Photos from company picnics, before they stopped inviting the help, and every single pay stub she'd ever received. $7.25 an hour in 1994, $12.50 an hour in 2024, 30 years of service, and she still made less than Richard spent on lunch. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about Timothy. It was about Mrs. Chen. It was about every family in her community who'd trusted Hartwell Associates because Martha worked there. "They trusted you because I cleaned your floors," she said to Richard's photo in the company newsletter. "And you betrayed us all." Martha picked up her phone again. This time she didn't call the news. She called someone more powerful, Reverend Williams at St. Mark's Baptist. "Reverend, it's Martha. I need you to call a special meeting tonight. And I need you to invite everyone who's ever used Hartwell Associates for legal help." "Sister Martha, what's this about?" Martha looked at the foreclosure notice she'd smoothed out on her table. Timothy's address stared back at her. "It's about getting our dignity back." The basement of St. Mark's Baptist had seen many gatherings over its 75 years, weddings, funerals, Sunday school classes, but never anything like this. 47 people filled those folding chairs. Martha knew every face, every story, every loss. There was Mrs. Chen still rationing her heart medication, the Jackson family who'd lost their family business after the small settlement, Robert Washington walking with a cane because he couldn't afford proper surgery after his workplace accident. Martha stood at the front, still wearing her cleaning uniform. She'd thought about changing, but decided against it. Let them see her as she was, as she'd always been. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry." The room stirred. Mrs. Chen spoke up, her voice gentle despite her pain. "Martha, honey, what do you have to be sorry for? For 30 years I've watched the Hartwell firm steal from you, from us, and I kept quiet because I needed the job, because I thought keeping my head down and working hard was enough." Martha pulled out her notebook, her hands trembling not from fear but from 30 years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "But yesterday, I found out they're foreclosing on my grandson's house. The same firm where I've scrubbed toilets for 3 decades is trying to take my grandbabies home. And that's when I realized they've been taking our homes all along, just doing it legal-like." She opened the notebook and began to read. Name after name, case after case, dollar after dollar stolen from people who could least afford it. "Mrs. Chen, your husband's death benefit wasn't $50,000. It was $500,000. Richard Hartwell kept $450,000. Mrs. Chen's face crumpled. That money would have paid for her medications, her mortgage, her grandchildren's college. "Robert, your workplace injury settlement wasn't $15,000, it was $200,000. Robert's cane clattered to the floor as he buried his face in his hands. "For 20 minutes, Martha read. Each revelation was a punch to the gut. Each stolen dollar was a dream deferred, a life diminished, a future stolen. When she finished, the room was silent except for quiet sobbing. Then from the back, old Mr. Samuel stood up. At 82, he was the eldest in the room. He'd lost his wife because they couldn't afford her cancer treatment after Hartwell Associates told them the insurance settlement was minimal. "Sister Martha," he said, his voice strong despite his tears, "what do we do now?" Martha closed her notebook and looked at the faces before her, her community, her family, the people who'd worked hard all their lives, only to be robbed by those they trusted. "We fight back, but not with lawyers, not with violence. We fight back with the truth, and I've got 30 years of it." Reverend Williams spoke first. "Martha, they're powerful people. They've got judges in their pockets. What can we do?" Martha smiled, not the subservient smile she'd worn for 30 years, but something harder, something Earl would have recognized. "Reverend, you know what I learned cleaning their offices? Powerful people are sloppy. They leave evidence everywhere because they think the cleaning lady can't read." She pulled out a box from under the table. Inside were photocopies of documents, USB drives, even old cassette tapes. "They had me clean out their old storage room last year, told me to throw away anything older than 7 years. But I didn't throw it away. I brought it home. Every document, every file, every piece of evidence they thought was gone." Mr. Samuel leaned forward. "What about the statute of limitations? Some of these cases are decades old." Martha's smile grew wider. "That's the beautiful thing about fraud, Mr. Samuel. When it's ongoing, when it's systematic, when it involves racketeering, there is no statute of limitations." She pulled out one final item, a business card. This is Janet Chen from Channel 7. She's Mrs. Chen's niece. She's been investigating corruption in the city for 15 years. Tomorrow morning, she's going to break the biggest story of her career." Mrs. Chen stood up, her frail frame shaking with emotion. "You contacted my Janet?" "I did more than that, Mrs. Chen. I gave her everything, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. By tomorrow night, Richard Hartwell Jr. won't just be exposed, he'll be finished." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in something more powerful: hope. For the first time in decades, these people, Martha's people, had a chance at real justice. Martha couldn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room, looking at photos of Earl, of her children, of Timothy. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Williams? This is Patricia Hartwell, Richard's wife." Martha's hand tightened on the phone. "Mrs. Hartwell, I know what you're planning to do. Richard doesn't know I'm calling. He's passed out drunk in his study. He knows something's coming." "And why are you calling me?" There was a long pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more human. "Because for 30 years, you cleaned my house too. You raised my children when I was at the country club. You were there when Rebecca took her first steps, when Michael had nightmares, when I had my miscarriage, and Richard was too busy to come home." Martha remembered. She remembered everything. "You were more of a mother to my children than I was, and I let my husband treat you like you were nothing. I'm calling to say, do what you have to do. My children deserve a better father than what Richard became, and those families deserve justice." The line went dead. Martha sat in the darkness, thinking about Patricia Hartwell, another woman trapped by circumstances, making choices she'd have to live with forever. But Martha had made her choice too, and tomorrow everyone would see what 30 years of patience could accomplish. At exactly 6 p.m. the next evening, Martha Williams sat in her living room surrounded by her family and friends from St. Mark's Baptist. The TV was on Channel 7. Janet Chen's face filled the screen. "Good evening. Tonight we bring you an exclusive investigation that exposes 3 decades of systematic fraud at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. This story comes to us from an unlikely source, a 58-year-old cleaning woman who's been documenting crimes from the shadows for 30 years. The room held its breath. What followed was journalism at its finest. Janet Chen laid out the evidence methodically, professionally, devastatingly. Documents appeared on screen. Audio recordings played. The scope of the fraud was staggering. $23 million stolen from over 400 families over 3 decades. But it was Martha's interview that stopped the city cold. She sat in her church dress, the one she wore for Easter and funerals, her hands folded in her lap. When Janet asked her why she'd stayed quiet for so long, Martha's answer was simple. "I had children to feed. I had bills to pay. I had a family to protect." Every working person knows that sometimes you have to swallow your pride to keep food on the table. But when they came for my grandson's home, when they tried to take the future I'd been building for 30 years, that's when I realized that silence is its own kind of theft. The camera zoomed in on Martha's face, and for the first time in 30 years, the city saw her. Really saw her. People like Richard Hartwell Jr. think we're invisible. They think we're stupid. They think we don't understand what they're doing, but I want every person watching to know something. The people who clean your offices, who guard your buildings, who serve your food. We see everything. We remember everything. And sometimes we write it all down. By 6:30, Richard Hartwell Jr.'s phone was ringing off the hook. By 7:00, protesters were gathering outside Hartwell Associates. By 8:00, the FBI had launched an investigation. But in Martha Williams' living room, there was only quiet satisfaction. "Mama," Kenya whispered, "you did it." Martha shook her head. "No, baby. We did it. Every person who's been stepped on, overlooked, and underestimated. We all did it together." The next day at exactly 9 a.m., her phone rang. It was Richard Hartwell Jr. "Martha, what have you done?" His voice was different now, No longer commanding, no longer dismissive. For the first time in 30 years, Richard Hartwell Jr. sounded afraid. "I did my job, Mr. Richard. I cleaned up your mess, just like always." "Martha, please, we can work this out. I'll pay you. Whatever you want. $1 million, $2 million. Just call off the dogs." Martha thought about all the times she'd needed just a small raise, just a little help with medical bills, just a tiny bit of respect. All the times he'd walked past her like she was furniture. "Mr. Richard, you can't afford me. You never could." She hung up. By noon, the FBI had raided Hartwell Associates. By evening, Richard Hartwell Jr. was in federal custody. By the end of the week, 6 judges, 12 lawyers, and countless court officials were under investigation. But the real victory came 2 weeks later. Martha was at home when the doorbell rang. A courier stood there with an envelope. "Martha Williams? This is from the Federal Restitution Fund." Inside was a check. Not for her, Martha had never stolen anything, but it was made out to Timothy's parents for the full value of their home plus damages. Her grandson's house was safe. Over the next month, checks arrived for every family who'd been cheated. Mrs. Chen got her $450,000. Robert Washington got his $185,000. The Jacksons, the Williamses, the Perezes, every family got what was stolen from them, plus interest. But for Martha, the sweetest moment came when she returned to Hartwell Associates one last time. The building was being cleared out. Federal agents were boxing up files. The mahogany halls were being stripped bare. Martha walked through those halls one last time, not pushing a cleaning cart but walking tall, her head high, her granddaughter Keisha holding her hand. "Grandma," Keisha asked, "is this where you worked?" "This is where I watched, baby. This is where I waited. This is where I learned that patience isn't weakness, it's power." As they left, Martha saw something that made her stop. Richard's nameplate, the one she'd polished every day for 5 years, was in the trash. She walked past it without a second glance. She was done cleaning up after Richard Hartwell Jr. 6 months later, Martha Williams walked into a building she'd never thought she'd enter as anything but cleaning staff. The State Attorney General's office. But this time she wasn't carrying a mop. "Mrs. Williams," the Attorney General stood as she entered, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Martha shook his hand firmly, the same hand that had scrubbed his office floors when he was just a junior prosecutor. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Davidson." "Mrs. Williams, what you did, exposing 30 years of corruption with nothing but patience and notebooks. It's changed how we think about oversight in this city." He gestured to a chair. Martha sat, her back straight, her hands folded. "We want to offer you a position, director of our new Ethical Oversight Division. Your job would be to train others, janitors, security guards, maintenance workers, to recognize and report corruption." Martha was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Earl, about what he would say. She thought about Timothy, about the world she wanted to leave for him. "What's the salary?" $85,000 a year, full benefits, pension. More money than Martha had made in her entire life combined. "I'll take it, on one condition." The Attorney General leaned forward. "Name it." "I want to hire my own team. People who've been invisible. People who've been watching. People who understand that real oversight comes from those who've been overlooked." "Consider it done," said the Attorney General. Martha Williams stood, shook his hand again and walked out of that office with her head high. At 58 years old, after 30 years of being invisible, Martha Williams had finally been seen. 5 years later, Martha Williams stood before a packed auditorium at the annual Ethics in Law conference. She was 63 now, her hair completely grey, her hands showing the wear of decades of hard work. But her voice was strong as she addressed the crowd of lawyers, judges, and law students. 5 years ago I was invisible. I cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, and listened to your conversations. You thought I was furniture. You thought I was nothing." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Today I run a division of 150 people. Former janitors, security guards, food service workers. All of us invisible people who see everything. We've exposed corruption in 47 law firms, 23 government offices, and 15 major corporations." The audience was silent, a mix of shame and admiration on their faces. "But I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to teach you something my late husband Earl told me 30 years ago. Baby, the Lord gives us eyes to see and ears to hear, but it's up to us to bear witness." Martha pulled out her old notebook, the same one Earl had given her in 1994. Its pages were yellowed, its cover worn, but it had started everything. "This notebook brought down an empire, not because I'm special, but because I paid attention, because I remembered, because I understood that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless." A young law student raised her hand. "Mrs. Williams, don't you think what you did was unethical? Recording conversations, keeping documents?" Martha studied the young woman. Probably came from money, probably never scrubbed a toilet in her life. "Honey, let me ask you something. Is it ethical to steal millions from grieving widows? Is it ethical to laugh about these people while taking their last dollar? Is it ethical to destroy families while your cleaning lady watches?" The student lowered her hand. "I'll tell you what's ethical," Martha continued. "It's ethical to protect people who can't protect themselves. It's ethical to speak for those who have no voice. It's ethical to remember when everyone else wants to forget." She looked out at the audience one more time. "Every one of you has someone invisible in your life. Someone who cleans your office, guards your building, serves your food. I want you to remember that they're watching, they're learning, and maybe, just maybe, they're writing it all down." Martha left the stage to thunderous applause, but she didn't care about the recognition anymore. What mattered was waiting for her in the lobby. Timothy, now 13, wearing his school uniform and beaming with pride. "Grandma, you were amazing!" Martha hugged her grandson tight. "Baby, I just told the truth. That's all I've ever done." Later that evening, Martha sat in her new office, a real office with windows and her name on the door. The walls were covered with photos, her team of formerly invisible workers, families who'd gotten justice, newspaper clippings of corruption exposed. But the photo that mattered most sat on her desk, Earl in his Sunday best, taken just before he died. "I did it, baby," she whispered to the photo. "I bore witness just like you said." A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Maria Santos, one of her newest recruits, poked her head in. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry to bother you, but I found something at the Morrison Industries building. I think you need to see this." Maria was 52, had been cleaning offices for 20 years, and had the same careful attention to detail that Martha recognized in herself. Martha looked at the documents Maria handed her. Her experienced eyes caught the fraud immediately, another company stealing from its workers' pension funds. "Good work, Maria. Document everything. Date it, photograph it, back it up 3 ways. You know the drill." "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "Do you ever regret it? Losing your job, making enemies, putting yourself at risk?" Martha thought about the question. She thought about 30 years of silence, of swallowed pride, of watching injustice and saying nothing. "Maria, I regret every day I stayed quiet. I regret every family that got hurt while I kept my head down. But I don't regret standing up, not for 1 second." Maria nodded and left. Martha turned back to Earl's photo. "One more, baby. We've got one more to catch." 2 years later, Martha Williams announced her retirement. At 65, she'd trained over 200 invisible workers to become ethical watchdogs. Her program had recovered over $100 million for cheated families. She'd testified before Congress, written a book, and become a symbol of quiet resistance. But it was her retirement party that showed her true impact. The church basement at St. Mark's Baptist was packed, not with politicians or lawyers or important people, but with the invisible army she'd built. Janitors, security guards, food service workers, maintenance crews, all wearing buttons that said, "I see everything." Mrs. Chen was there, healthy now that she could afford her medications. Robert Washington walked without a cane, his surgery finally paid for. The Jackson family had rebuilt their business. And in the front row sat Timothy, now 15, tall and proud, and planning to become a civil rights lawyer. Reverend Williams called Martha to the front. Sister Martha, you've shown us that justice doesn't always come from the powerful. Sometimes it comes from those who watch and wait and remember. You've given us our dignity back." Martha looked out at the faces, her people, her community, her family. "I want to tell you all something," she began, her voice strong despite her tears. "For 30 years I thought I was just surviving, just getting by, just doing what I had to do to feed my family." She paused, thinking of Earl, of all the nights she'd come home exhausted, of all the indignities she'd endured. "But I learned something. Every time we stay quiet in the face of injustice, we become complicit. Every time we look away, we give permission. Every time we say, 'That's just how things are,' we help them stay that way." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "But we also have power. The power of patience, the power of memory, the power of truth. And when we use that power together, we can bring down empires." She held up her old notebook one last time. "This notebook is going to the Smithsonian. They want to put it in their American history collection. Can you imagine? A cleaning lady's notebook in a museum." The room erupted in cheers and applause. "But I want each of you to remember, you don't need a museum to make your observations matter. You just need courage, you just need patience. You just need to remember that invisible doesn't mean powerless." As the party continued, Martha stepped outside for some air. The evening was warm, the sky clear. She thought about Earl, about how proud he'd be. A young woman approached, maybe 25, wearing a janitor's uniform. "Mrs. Williams, I just started working at a law firm downtown. I'm seeing things, hearing things. What do I do?" Martha smiled and pulled a small notebook from her purse. She always carried extras now. "You write it down, honey. You date it. You document it. And when the time is right, you bear witness." The young woman took the notebook reverently like it was a sacred text. Will it make a difference? Martha thought about her journey, from invisible cleaning lady to corruption fighter, from silence to voice, from nothing to something. "Baby, let me tell you what I've learned. One person paying attention can change everything. One notebook can bring down an empire. One cleaning lady can get justice for hundreds of families." She put her hand on the young woman's shoulder. "You're not just a janitor. You're a guardian. You're a witness. You're the eyes and ears of justice. Don't ever let them make you feel like less than that." The young woman nodded and walked away, clutching the notebook. Martha watched her go, knowing the cycle would continue. The invisible would keep watching. The powerful would keep forgetting they were being watched. And justice would keep finding a way. Martha Williams passed away peacefully at age 75, surrounded by family and the hundreds of lives she'd touched. Her funeral filled the largest church in the city. The governor spoke. The attorney general spoke. But the most powerful eulogy came from Timothy Williams, Esquire, age 25, the youngest civil rights lawyer in the state. "My grandmother taught me that dignity isn't given, it's claimed, that respect isn't granted, it's earned, that justice isn't handed down from above, it rises up from below." He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of invisible workers still carrying on Martha's mission. She started with a notebook and ended with a movement. She started as a cleaning lady and ended as a hero. She started invisible and ended unforgettable. Timothy held up a new notebook, its cover embossed with gold letters. The Martha Williams Foundation for Ethical Oversight. Today, we launch this foundation to train invisible workers everywhere, to give them notebooks, to teach them their observations matter, to remind them that patience is power and truth is unstoppable. As the service ended, hundreds of people filed past Martha's casket. Each one left a small notebook beside her, a promise to keep watching, keep remembering, keep fighting. And somewhere, in law firms and corporations and government buildings across the country, invisible workers were paying attention, writing things down, waiting for their moment, because Martha Williams had taught them the most important lesson of all. The people who think you don't matter are the ones who matter least. The ones who ignore you are the ones worth watching. And sometimes the cleaning lady is the most powerful person in the building. She just has to remember to write it all down. Martha Williams' story reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear cleaning uniforms. Sometimes they carry mop buckets, and sometimes they change the world with nothing but patience, courage, and a notebook full of truth. For every invisible worker who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored, your time is coming. Keep watching, keep remembering, keep writing it down. Justice may be blind, but the cleaning lady sees everything. My dear friend, if you're listening to this, you probably remember when a handshake meant something, when loyalty was rewarded with loyalty, when working hard for 30 years actually meant security and respect. You remember when yes ma'am and no sir were taught at home, when Sunday dinners brought 3 generations to one table, when your word was your bond and your reputation was everything. Those days aren't gone. They live in us, in our stories, in our memories, in our refusal to let the world forget what honor looks like. Martha Williams was one of us. She remembered when old Mr. Hartwell knew every employee's name. She watched respect die and dignity get trampled. But she also showed us that our generation's greatest weapon isn't our youth, it's our memory. We've seen enough sunrises to know darkness doesn't last forever. Every day I share stories like Martha's, stories of people our age who said enough, who used their wisdom, their patience, and their long memories to right wrongs and restore dignity. These aren't fairy tales, they're testimonies. Love letters to a generation that built this world with calloused hands and kept promises. Subscribe and join our family of silver-haired warriors who refuse to be pushed aside. Hit the bell, because at our age, we've earned the right to be heard first. Share this with your coffee group, your church friends, your grandchildren. Let them know Grandma and Grandpa still have some fight left. You know what? They call us seniors. They offer us discounts like we're past our prime. They speak slowly like we can't understand. But we're the generation that remembers phone numbers by heart, that can fix things without YouTube, that knows the value of waiting, watching, and choosing the perfect moment to act. We're not just older, we're wiser. We're not just seniors, we're survivors. And Martha Williams, she was one of us. Subscribe now and let's remind this world that grey hair means we've been taking notes longer than they've been alive. Bye for now.